I said, remove her. Captain Joel Carver's hand came down flat on the check-in table as he leaned toward the two officers flanking him, his long-sleeved uniform dark against the white marble columns of the Ashford Military Honor Hall, afternoon sun blazing through the skylight and casting hard shadows across his expression. Vanessa Hartley stood perfectly still in a burgundy blazer over a crisp white shirt and dark slacks, her chin level, her eyes carrying something that had nothing to do with fear. She had given this country 30 years and her only son. Carver didn't know that. He hadn't asked. He had seen a black woman standing alone near the reserved family section without a lanyard, and that had been enough. She has no credentials, no clearance, and she is disrupting a dignified event, he announced loud enough for the nearest press pool to record. Ma'am, you are being escorted out. The officer's hands closed on her arms, and the room went quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when something feels wrong but no one is sure yet how wrong. Outside, through the tall glass panels that lined the east wall, a decorated army general stopped mid-stride on the flagstone path, stared at the woman being walked toward the exit door, and broke into a run. Welcome to Frost Folktales. This is where we tell the stories of those who were underestimated, dismissed, and targeted, yet chose courage over silence. If these stories move you, subscribe and be part of a community that refuses to let them fade into the background. The Ashford Military Honor Hall had been built to impress, and on this particular Saturday afternoon, it succeeded. Natural light poured through a continuous row of skylights that ran the length of the vaulted ceiling, falling in long bright columns across marble floors, so polished they threw back the reflections of pressed uniforms and draped flags. Tall glass panels lined the east wall from floor to ceiling, overlooking the flagstone courtyard where guests were still arriving, still gathering in clusters of blue and gray and the deep formal green of dress uniforms. Rows of white chairs had been arranged in precise formation facing a raised platform at the hall's north end, and at the center of that platform sat a single empty chair draped in a folded American flag. On an easel beside the podium, a framed photograph of a young soldier smiled at the room with the particular confidence of someone who still believed the future was long. Vanessa Hartley had arrived 40 minutes early. She had always arrived early. In 30 years of active service, early was not a habit. It was a discipline, the kind that becomes so embedded in the body it no longer requires a decision. She had driven herself 2 hours from her house to the city, the invitation letter folded in the interior pocket of her blazer, because she had read it enough times that folding it felt like the appropriate respect. The letter had said family of the honored. It had listed the date, the address, the dress code, business formal, and the time doors would open. It had not mentioned a lanyard. It had not mentioned a credential check. She had walked through the main entrance when the doors opened, accepted a ceremony program from a young volunteer whose hands were shaking slightly with first-day nerves, and found her way to the reserved family section by following the small printed signs that said exactly that, reserved family. She had stood there for perhaps 15 minutes before Joel Carver saw her. She had not been causing a scene. She had not been speaking to anyone or asking for anything. She had been standing in the light coming through the skylight above the family section, holding the ceremony program in both hands, looking at the photograph of Marcus Hartley printed on its cover. Her son's face looked back at her from the glossy paper. 29 years old in the photograph, his dress uniform sharp, his expression carrying exactly the certainty she had spent his whole childhood watching him develop. She knew that photograph. She had a copy of it framed in her living room. She had a copy of it folded in her wallet. She had been looking at it for 3 years in the particular way that mothers look at photographs that have become the primary sight of a person. The hall continued filling around her. Dignitaries moved to their assigned seats in the front rows. Press correspondents positioned cameras on tripods along the designated media line that ran parallel to the east glass wall, the afternoon sun behind them. Officers in full dress uniforms spoke in low voices and checked programs and adjusted medals and ribbons with the practiced self-consciousness of people who know they are being looked at. The overhead fluorescent panels along the hall's interior supplemented the skylight, keeping the room in the kind of clean, bright, unavoidable light that makes every expression readable from a distance. Joel Carver was reading expressions from a distance. That was, as he understood it, his job. He was positioned near the credentialing table at the hall's interior entrance, a placement he had chosen himself as part of what he considered a well-constructed security posture for an event of this profile. The governor would be in attendance, federal representatives, military brass, cameras. Any lapse in visible security management was, to Joel Carver, a lapse in visible competence, and Joel Carver did not tolerate visible incompetence, especially his own. He had run similar events before. He understood how they worked. He understood the difference between people who belonged in a space and people who had wandered into one, and he had developed, over the years, a confidence in his ability to make that distinction at a glance that he had never once paused to examine for accuracy. He saw Vanessa Hartley, and he made the distinction in under 4 seconds. Black woman, alone, near the roped section. No lanyard visible. No escort. No one speaking to her or acknowledging her as a known guest. Standing still, which in his assessment was the posture of someone uncertain whether they should be somewhere, rather than what it actually was. The posture of someone who had spent 3 decades knowing how to occupy a space with complete stillness and complete authority. He did not consider the second interpretation. He did not approach her and ask a question. Questions were for situations where the answer was unclear. Joel Carver had already determined the answer. His hand came down on the table. Lieutenant Sarah Monroe and Officer Dean Calloway were both within 3 steps of him, and they turned at the impact of his palm on the surface with the trained responsiveness of officers who had learned that Joel Carver communicated in physical emphasis. Carver's voice dropped just enough to feel like command rather than spectacle, though not so far that the press pool positioned 12 feet to his left couldn't hear it. His long-sleeved uniform, decorated with the precise number of commendations that satisfied his sense of professional self-presentation, pulled slightly at the shoulders as he pointed once toward the family section. Remove her. She has no credentials, no clearance, and she is disrupting a dignified event. Sarah Monroe hesitated for a fraction of a second. It was the fraction of a second that would stay with her for months afterward. That small, insufficient pause in which something in her registered that she did not know enough to be doing what she was about to do. Then training in rank closed over the hesitation, and she moved. Vanessa Hartley looked up from the ceremony program. When they reached her, she did not look startled. She did not look confused. She looked at the 2 officers approaching her with the expression of someone who has encountered institutional failure before and has learned to meet it with a specific quality of stillness. Not the stillness of submission, but the stillness of a person who understands that the moment requires composure the way a battlefield requires clarity. It was not passivity, it was precision. She had been in situations, across 30 years of service, where composure was the only weapon available, and she had become very good with that weapon. "Ma'am, you'll need to come with us." Sarah Monroe's voice was professional and apologetic in equal measure, which was the sound of someone doing something wrong with good manners. Dean Calloway said nothing. He took her right arm above the elbow with the matter-of-fact grip of a man executing a directive. Sarah Monroe took her left. Vanessa Hartley let them. She did not pull away. She did not raise her voice. She did not say, "My name is Sergeant Major Vanessa Hartley, and I have 30 years of service and 2 combat deployments and a son whose photograph is on every program in this room." She said nothing. She allowed herself to be walked toward the side exit with the ceremony program still held in her hands. her chin still level, her eyes straight ahead, with the kind of dignity that is not performed for an audience, but maintained because it is what a person is made of. The room noticed, not loudly, not with anyone standing up or calling out, but the particular silence that settles over a crowd when something registers as wrong, when the body of a room responds before its voices do, moved through the Ashford Military Honor Hall like a wave under still water. Heads turned. Eyes followed the direction of Sarah Monroe and Dean Calloway, and the woman between them. Conversations paused. A press camera, mounted on a tripod near the media line, tracked the movement with the impersonal thoroughness of a machine that records everything and discriminates nothing. Behind them, Joel Carver had already moved on. He was turning toward the press pool, straightening his posture by a degree, and delivering what amounted to a public statement about a security action he had taken less than 90 seconds ago. His tone was the specific tone of a man narrating his own competence. No credentials, no clearance, potential disruption to a dignified military ceremony. Standard protocol. He said protocol, the way some men say the law, as if the word itself were armor. Linda Achebe, lead correspondent for the state's largest news network, stood at the press line in a steel gray blazer over a black blouse, her press badge on a lanyard around her neck. She had been covering military ceremonies for 11 years. She had covered medals and memorials and processions and tributes, and she had developed, across 11 years, a precise instinct for the difference between news and ceremony. She looked at the woman being walked toward the side door. She looked at Joel Carver, performing his incident report for the cameras. She looked back at the woman. She did not stop her camera operator from rolling. At the side exit, the door was being pressed open by Dean Calloway's shoulder. The bright afternoon light from the flagstone courtyard cutting a sharp rectangle into the hall's interior. Vanessa Hartley stepped through with the two officers still at her arms, the door beginning its slow arc back behind them, the sound of the ceremony hall muffling as the distance grew. She looked once at the program in her hands. Her son's photograph looked back. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass panels of the east wall, the flagstone courtyard was visible in the full clarity of the afternoon sun. A path led from the main gate to the entrance, and on that path, a figure in full army dress uniform was walking toward the building with the measured stride of a man whose bearing had been arranged by decades of service into something permanent. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his chest carrying the organized weight of a 4-star career. General Thomas Equame was running 2 minutes behind schedule, which was unusual for him, and he was composing in his mind the particular apology he would make to the ceremony coordinator when he arrived. He had not yet arrived when he saw her through the glass. He stopped, not slowed, not paused, stopped completely, mid-stride on the flagstone path, 1 foot still forward from his last step, his eyes fixed on the side exit door where 2 uniformed officers were walking a woman away from the building in the direction of the street. He stared for 2 full seconds. He stared the way a person stares when what they are seeing does not match any category their mind has prepared for. Then recognition closed over the dissonance, and General Thomas Equame, decorated 4-star General of the United States Army, did something no one in the courtyard had anticipated. He ran. The side exit door of the Ashford Military Honor Hall was made of heavy steel, painted the color of old bone, and it closed behind Vanessa Hartley with the particular finality of a sound that had nothing to do with her. It simply closed, the way institutional things close, the way systems close, without ceremony, without acknowledgement, without any awareness at all of what they were shutting out. She stood on the narrow flagstone landing outside, the afternoon sun overhead pressing clean white light across the stone steps and the trimmed hedges and the American flag on the pole 40 feet away, snapping in a light wind. Lieutenant Sarah Monroe stood to her left. Officer Dean Calloway stood slightly behind her, arms at his sides now, the urgency of the escort already draining from his posture into something that looked almost like relief that the task was complete. Through the tall glass panels that ran along the east wall of the Honor Hall, Vanessa Hartley could see the interior of the ceremony space. She could see the rows of pressed uniforms and formal suits. She could see the flags arranged behind the podium. She could see, at the front of the room, the family chair, her chair, empty. A folded program resting on the seat like a bookmark in a story that had paused without her. Through the glass and the steel door, muffled but unmistakable, she heard the first resonant notes of a microphone being adjusted, and then a voice beginning to speak. The ceremony was starting. It was starting without her. In the building she had arrived early to, as she had always arrived early. Because 30 years of service had made early arrival not a habit, but a reflex. The way breathing is a reflex. The way standing straight is a reflex. 30 years. She held that number somewhere behind her sternum, where it had lived for most of her adult life, not as a credential to display, but as a fact too large to explain to anyone who hadn't lived it. She had enlisted at 22. Not because she had no other options, and she wanted that on the record, at least in the record of her own memory. She had options. She had a partial scholarship and a talent for mathematics that her high school teachers had noted with the particular mixture of genuine admiration and institutional surprise that she had learned to accept without comment. She had enlisted because her uncle Raymond had served, and because something in her was built for structure and purpose and the particular clarity that comes from knowing exactly what you are supposed to do and doing it better than anyone around you. Basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina summer heat, like something with a physical weight to it, pressing down on every morning formation. She had been one of 14 women in her training company, and she had finished 4th overall in physical assessments. A fact her drill sergeant had noted with a grunt that she understood, even then, was the closest to a compliment the situation was designed to produce. She moved up. That was the accurate phrase for it. She moved up because she was skilled, and because she was determined, and because she understood, very early, that the Army had a logic to it, and that if you learned the logic, not just the surface rules, but the actual underlying structure of how things worked, and who trusted whom, and what competence looked like when it was real versus when it was performed, you could navigate it with precision. She was promoted to corporal in 14 months, to sergeant 2 years after that. Her first deployment was to Kuwait in 1999. Her second was to Iraq in 2003, where she led a logistics and support unit through 8 months of conditions that she had never since returning described in detail to anyone who had not been there. Not out of trauma, not exactly, out of the conviction that language was insufficient and that people who had not smelled that particular combination of diesel and desert and fear and discipline simply did not have the reference points to receive the description accurately. So she had kept it close. She kept a lot close. She rose to staff sergeant, then to sergeant first class, then to master sergeant, which surprised some people who did not know her and no one who did. Her third deployment was to Afghanistan in 2011. She was 41 years old. She had a 12-year-old son named Marcus at home in Virginia with her mother, and she had sent him a letter from Kandahar province every single week, without exception. 52 letters over the course of the year, written on whatever paper was available and mailed through the military postal system with a reliability that Marcus later told her felt, to him as a child, like proof that the world was organized and that his mother was holding her end of it together, no matter what was happening on her end. He had saved all 52 letters in a shoebox under his bed. She had found this out years later and had stood in his childhood bedroom, holding that shoebox for a long time without saying anything. Marcus Hartley had been 3 years old the first time Vanessa left for training. He had grown up in the particular geography of a military family. The patience, the independence, the ability to hold things together in the absence of a parent without resentment, because the absence had been framed honestly from the beginning, as service and not as abandonment. She had always been precise about that distinction. She had never let him confuse the two. He had been 16 when he told her he was going to enlist. She had not been surprised. She had sat across from him at the kitchen table in the house in Fredericksburg and looked at him for a long moment, at the set of his jaw and the steadiness of his eyes, which were her father's eyes in her son's face, and she had said, "You're going to be good at it." That was all, because he was, and because she knew it, and because sometimes the most honest thing a mother can say is not a warning, but a recognition. Staff Sergeant Marcus Hartley. He had made that rank by 24. She had cried when he told her. Quietly, in the kitchen, after he hung up the phone. Not from sadness, from something that had no clean name, some mixture of pride and fear, and the specific grief of knowing that you have given someone everything you are, and then they walk toward the same danger you walked toward, and this time you cannot be there to hold your end of it together. His final deployment was to Kandahar province, the same province where she had served 12 years before. She did not know if he had thought about that. She thought about it constantly. She had been retired for 8 months when the knock came. She had put in her papers at 53, as Sergeant Major, the highest enlisted rank in the United States Army, after 31 years. She had been gardening on a Tuesday morning in October. She was wearing a green work shirt and old jeans, and had soil on both hands, and was kneeling in the side bed where she had been trying, with moderate success, to establish a patch of lavender. She heard the car door close on the street, then another car door. She did not look up immediately. She was finishing what she was doing with the trowel, setting the root ball into the prepared soil, pressing the earth around it with both palms the way her mother had taught her. Then she looked up. 2 soldiers in dress uniforms were coming up the front walk. She knew. She knew before she stood up. She knew while she was still kneeling in the dirt with her palms pressing soil around a lavender root ball on a Tuesday morning in October. She had known too many soldiers who had made that walk and carried that notification and come back changed by it. She recognized the walk. She recognized the particular quality of discipline required to walk that walk, to hold your face composed and your posture correct, while carrying something that weighs more than any physical object. She stood up. She did not wipe her hands. She walked to the front step, and she met them there, and she did not make them say the opening sentence, because she already knew, and making them say it would not have changed anything, and would only have cost them more. She did not remember what she said. She remembered the sound of a woodpecker somewhere in the yard, very clear and very close, working at the oak near the back fence. She remembered the quality of the October light. She remembered that one of the notification officers was very young, younger than Marcus, and that he was struggling, and that she had put her hand briefly on his arm because he was a soldier and he was struggling, and that was what you did. She stood now outside the Ashford Military Honor Hall in the same afternoon light of a different season. The steel door closed at her back, the ceremony audible and muffled through the glass, and she looked at her hands, which were clean today, dressed today, folded in front of her with the ceremony program pressed between her palms, the program with Marcus Hartley's photograph on the cover, his dress uniform, his smile, the smile that was his father's smile in her son's face. Lieutenant Sarah Munro was looking at the flagstone ground 3 feet in front of her own shoes. She was young. She had the posture of someone who had been trained to project certainty and was currently failing at it, and she knew she was failing, and the awareness was in every line of her body. Vanessa Hartley had trained soldiers like Sarah Munro, had trained hundreds of them over 31 years, had learned in that time to read the exact quality of someone's uncertainty and to know whether it was the uncertainty of someone who was wrong and beginning to understand it, or the uncertainty of someone who had been wrong from the start and was never going to arrive at understanding. She could tell the difference. She had always been able to tell the difference. She looked at the young lieutenant. Sarah Monroe's jaw was tight. Her eyes were fixed on the ground with the focus of someone who does not trust what their face might do if they look up. Vanessa Hartley said it quietly, not loudly, not with performance, not with the demand for impact that the moment could have accommodated and that she would not allow herself. She said it the way she had said things for 31 years, with exactness, with control, with the understanding that precision is more powerful than volume. "That's my son's ceremony." Lieutenant Sarah Monroe looked up. The expression on the young officer's face was not one Vanessa Hartley would describe later to anyone who asked. Some things are too specific and too human to be handed to language. But she saw it. She received it. She allowed the young woman one moment of full comprehension, one moment of understanding exactly what had been done and exactly who it had been done to, before she returned her gaze to the glass panels and the ceremony continuing inside. Sarah Monroe had gone completely still. The kind of still that is not discipline, but the temporary shutdown of every system that is not immediately necessary. Officer Dean Calloway, behind them, had not moved, and for different reasons would not move, would not speak, would not volunteer anything. The muffled voice inside the honor hall continued. Someone was at the podium. The words were not clear through the glass and the door, but the cadence was the cadence of tribute, of formal remembrance, of a ceremony built to honor something that could not be returned. And then, through the tall glass east wall, moving at a pace that was not a walk, Vanessa Hartley saw the figure in full dress uniform reach the building's main entrance, saw the 4 stars, saw the broad shoulders and the absolute authority of someone who had spent decades understanding exactly what mattered and exactly what did not, saw General Thomas Ekweme put his hand flat against the entrance door and say something to the event staff member who stepped forward, something that made the event staff member step immediately back. He was not slowing down. He was demanding to speak to whoever was in charge of security, and he was not asking. General Thomas Ekweme had not run in full dress uniform in 11 years. The last time had been at a funeral, a different kind of emergency, a different kind of wrong, but his body remembered how to do it, and his body did not wait for his mind to deliberate. The moment his eyes locked on Vanessa Hartley through the tall glass east wall of the Ashford Military Honor Hall, her arms held at the elbows, 2 uniformed officers flanking her, her chin level, her back straight, being walked toward a side exit like she had wandered in from the street. Something in General Thomas Ekweme's chest made a decision that bypassed every other system. He was already moving before he knew he had started. The flagstone path outside the honor hall was 40 feet from the main entrance. He covered it without breaking stride. His dress uniform was army green with 4 stars on each shoulder board. His chest a disciplined topography of service ribbons and campaign medals earned across 3 decades of conflict on 4 continents. He was broad-shouldered and tall, with the particular muscular solidity of a man who had never fully left the physical discipline of active duty behind. And when he pushed through the entrance doors, the usher stationed at the welcome table took one look at him and simply stepped aside without being asked. "General, the ceremony is..." Thomas Ekweme was already past her. He moved through the marble foyer with the particular economy of a man who has navigated hostile terrain, found the side corridor without hesitation, and pushed through the door with the flat of his hand. The afternoon light outside the side exit was sharp and direct. Overhead sun cutting a clean rectangle across the concrete landing where Vanessa Hartley stood. She had not moved. She had not attempted to explain herself again after Lieutenant Sarah Monroe had gone silent. She was simply standing there, the ceremony program from the event held in both hands in front of her, the pages slightly bent from where she had folded and unfolded them in the hour before everything went wrong. She wore the burgundy blazer over her white shirt, dark slacks, and low-heeled black shoes, and she looked precisely like what she was, a woman who had arrived for something sacred and been interrupted by something small. Lieutenant Sarah Munro stood to Vanessa Hartley's left. She had not regripped the arm she had released. She was looking at the concrete. Officer Dean Calloway still had his hand on Vanessa Hartley's right elbow, not forcefully, but present, the way a man holds something when he is waiting for someone to tell him he can let go. General Thomas Ekweme took in all of it in 2 seconds. The fury that moved through him was not loud. It was the kind of fury that comes from 34 years of military service, from watching people carry weight that would crush most human beings, and then watching smaller people fail to recognize what they were standing next to. It was cold and precise, and it had nowhere useful to go except forward. He stopped 3 feet from them. He did not look at Vanessa Hartley yet. He looked at Lieutenant Sarah Munro first, then at Officer Dean Calloway, and his voice when it came was measured and absolutely level. "I am General Thomas Ekweme, United States Army, retired, 4 stars. I need you to tell me who gave the order to remove this woman from the building." Sarah Munro straightened involuntarily, her mouth opened. "Captain Carver, sir. There were no visible credentials, and I did not ask for the justification." He said it without heat, which made it worse. "I asked for the name. I have the name." He shifted his gaze to Officer Dean Calloway. "Remove your hand from Sergeant Major Hartley." The title landed in the corridor, the way a gavel lands, with finality, with authority, with the implication that everything said before it had been preliminary. Sarah Munro turned her head sharply toward Vanessa Hartley. Something moved across her face, the specific expression of a person whose understanding of a situation has just been rebuilt from the foundation up. Dean Calloway's hand did not move immediately. There was a half-second where something in him calculated whether the order applied to him, whether the general had any formal authority over his actions here, whether protocol gave him cover. It was a short calculation, and it ended when General Thomas Ekweme simply looked at him, not with anger, with patience. The particular patience of a man who has looked at difficult terrain before and waited for it to resolve. Dean Calloway removed his hand. General Thomas Ekweme turned to Vanessa Hartley. There was a moment between them that did not require language. He had known her from her active duty years, not intimately, but in the way that people know each other across a shared institution when both have done the work and done it well. He had been at a training command review when she had been presented as an example of non-commissioned officer excellence. He had shaken her hand once at a corps-level function and remembered her because she had spoken about her soldiers the way the best NCOs always speak about their soldiers, as individuals, by name, with specific detail. He had not known, until he read the ceremony program on the flight in last Thursday, that the Staff Sergeant Marcus Hartley being honored was her son. He knew now. He looked at her, the ceremony program in her hands, the composure that had not cracked even when 2 officers were walking her out of her own son's ceremony, the way she was standing, not stiffly, not performing strength, just standing the way someone stands when they have decided that what is happening to them does not get to define what they are. "Sergeant Major Hartley," he said. His voice dropped slightly. "I am so sorry. I am taking you inside." Vanessa Hartley looked at him for one moment. She nodded once. That was all. She did not say anything about what had happened. She did not explain herself. She did not perform distress. She simply turned toward the door, and General Thomas Ekweme placed his hand steadily on her elbow. Not the grip of a man escorting someone, but the steadying gesture of a peer, of someone who understood exactly what she had given and what had been done to her in the last 20 minutes. They moved toward the door. Behind them, Sarah Munro had not moved. She was still staring at the spot on the concrete where Vanessa Hartley had been standing. Inside the honor hall, Captain Joel Carver was not thinking about the side exit anymore. He had returned to the main security station near the rear of the hall, and he was managing what he considered the natural aftermath of a clean security action. The ceremony had continued in his absence. He could hear the chaplain's invocation through the interior corridor, and he considered that a successful outcome. A potential disruption had been identified and neutralized. Protocol had been followed. If anything, this was an example of exactly the kind of proactive security management that a venue like this required. His radio crackled. One of his field officers, stationed near the side corridor. The voice was uncertain in a way that immediately irritated him. "Captain, we have a situation at the east side exit. There's a general here. 4 stars. Joel Carver pressed the transmit button. "I am managing the security posture for this entire event. Field personnel are not to interrupt that process for anything short of a direct threat. Handle it." He released the button. He adjusted the collar of his short-sleeved uniform shirt, the silver captain's bars catching the overhead fluorescent light above the security station, and moved toward the glass panel near the east corridor to check the sight lines. His reflection came back at him clearly, composed, authoritative, doing exactly what the occasion required. He smoothed the front of his shirt. He was composing the language he would use in his incident report. Civilian individual observed in restricted family section. No visible credentials or event designation. Security protocol initiated. Individual escorted from premises in compliance with event security parameters. He liked that. Event security parameters. It was precise. It left no room for ambiguity. He was still working through the phrasing when the side corridor door opened. He did not look immediately. He was adjusting something on the security station counter. Then he registered the change in the room, the specific quality of silence that a large room produces when a significant percentage of its occupants shift their attention to the same point simultaneously. It was a silence with a direction. He followed it through the glass panel, and then directly as he turned, he saw them. General Thomas Ikwemi came through the door first, and the way he moved through the side corridor entrance into the main hall was not the way anyone else had moved through any door in this building today. He was not hurrying now. He moved deliberately, his posture carrying the particular weight of someone who intends to be seen, and his hand was placed steadily on the elbow of the woman beside him in the burgundy blazer and dark slacks, and every step they took across the marble floor was visible to every person in the room. Joel Carver's understanding of his situation began to change. It changed the way a structural compromise changes, not all at once, but in a sequence that becomes irreversible once it starts. He saw the 4 stars first. Then he saw the expression on the general's face, which was controlled and absolute and pointed, in a general sense, at this entire room and what had occurred in it 20 minutes ago. Then he saw Vanessa Hartley, and he did not yet know who she was, but something in the picture was assembling itself around him in a way that he did not have language for yet. The press cameras had been on the podium. Then the lead camera operator from the state news network, stationed on the elevated press riser to the left of the central aisle, turned. He turned because his correspondent, Linda Achebe, had tapped his shoulder. She had watched the side door. She had been watching it since the moment Vanessa Hartley had been walked through it. She had been doing the rapid mental arithmetic of a journalist who understands that she may be standing inside a story that is about to become much larger than the story she arrived to cover. The camera turned. The press pool followed. The sound of Vanessa Hartley's shoes on the marble floor was the only sound moving through the hall now, and it was precise and unhurried, and it carried across the entire space the way sound carries in rooms built for ceremony, where every surface is designed to preserve what matters. Dignitaries in the front rows turned in their seats. A uniformed colonel near the center aisle leaned forward. The governor had paused in her prepared remarks, had simply stopped, one hand resting on the podium, and was watching the length of the hall with an expression that was carefully composed over something that was not composed at all. General Thomas Equame and Vanessa Hartley walked the marble floor together. He had not announced her. He had not said a word since they had come through the door. He did not need to. His hand on her elbow, and his posture, and the 4 stars on his shoulders, and the look on his face were an announcement that every person in the room was reading simultaneously, in real time, without a single word being spoken. Joel Carver watched them walk. He was still standing near the glass panel. His reflection was still there behind him. The captain's bars still catching the fluorescent light. He was very still now, in the way a person goes still when a situation has outgrown every category they prepared for it. He did not yet know about the camera that had been rolling since the moment his hand hit the table. He did not yet know that the footage existed. But somewhere at the back of his awareness, beneath the protocol and the incident report language and the certainty that he had acted correctly, something had registered that the room had changed in a way that was not going to change back. The cameras were still rolling, and Vanessa Hartley was still walking. The chair had sat there all morning, white-sashed, angled at the podium. It waited at the front of the family section. The program on its seat showed Marcus Hartley on the cover. Staff Sergeant, dress uniform 29, his mother's jaw, and his mother's eyes, smiling at a camera he couldn't see past. A volunteer had set it down at 8:47. The ceremony was well underway now, and the chair was still empty. Chaplain Douglas Whitfield had been watching it for 12 minutes. He was careful by profession. His job mostly came down to noticing what other people worked hard not to. He stood off to the side in his olive jacket and dark trousers, the cross insignia picking up light from the skylight, and he kept looking at that chair. Something was off about it. He couldn't say what yet. The hall was packed. 2 marble colonnades flanked 243 people. Officers in uniform, dignitaries, a row of state legislators, veterans in their organization blazers, and the press along the far wall, where Linda Achibe's camera operator had been rolling since before the procession started. Fluorescence filled in what the skylight couldn't reach. Everything looked like footage already. It was. Whitfield slipped along the edge of the room to Adjutant Colonel Nora Steinberg at the coordination table and leaned in. "The family chair is empty," he said. "I can't find the family liaison." Steinberg took it the way she took bad news, which was to start solving it before she'd finished hearing it. She got on her radio. The calls rang out, hit voicemail, or reached people who didn't know why Sergeant Major Vanessa Hartley hadn't come to her seat. Nobody had thought to look through the glass panels on the side of the building. Nobody had seen what Captain Joel Carver had done. Governor Caroline Voss was at the podium. Early 50s, silver in her hair, navy jacket over a cream blouse, with the composure of someone who'd stood through enough bad public moments to keep her face still while things came apart around her. She had clocked the empty chair before she walked up. She'd assumed someone would fill it. Nobody had. She watched the opening of the program from her seat, with the discipline of a person who couldn't afford to let the room read her. Then it was her turn. She adjusted the microphone. She looked out at the audience. The flags, the big framed photograph of Marcus Hartley at the front of the hall, the empty white sash chair. Then she started. Her voice was warm and steady. She talked about duty. She talked about courage that wasn't done for anyone's approval, just the natural result of knowing what was right. She said Staff Sergeant Marcus Hartley by name, and she felt the room shift forward the way rooms do when a name lands. She had read his citation 3 times. She knew what he'd done in that valley outside Kandahar, knew the names of the soldiers he dragged back to cover before the position went under. 2 of them were sitting in the 3rd row on the left, and she had planned to look at them when she said his name. She was 3 sentences in when the side door opened. It didn't open dramatically. No crash, no announcement. It opened the way a door opens when somebody is just walking through it. A clean motion, light spilling in from the corridor. Two figures in the doorway. General Thomas Equimy walked in first, 4-star, full dress. He had the sort of presence a room registers before it understands why. Tall, broad in the shoulders, moving without any hurry, because his authority had walked into the room ahead of him and he had never needed to argue with it. His uniform was immaculate under the overhead lights, every decoration in place, gold against dark fabric, peaked cap level on his head, and at his side, her hand resting lightly on the arm he offered her, was Vanessa Hartley. Burgundy blazer, white shirt, dark slacks, the same clothes she had worn when she arrived. The ceremony program still held in her free hand, slightly creased now from the grip she had maintained through the last 47 minutes. She walked with her chin level and her eyes forward, not scanning the room, not looking for reactions, not performing anything at all. She simply walked. She simply moved through the space that had been hers to begin with. Governor Caroline Voss stopped speaking mid-sentence. The word she had been forming, sacrifice, did not complete itself. It dissolved somewhere between her throat and the microphone, and the silence that replaced it expanded instantly to fill the entire hall with the particular quality of silence that happens when 243 people simultaneously stop making any sound at all and the room discovers its own acoustics. The only sound was Vanessa Hartley's shoes on the marble floor. Each step was clean and even. The marble carried it perfectly. A measured, unhurried rhythm that traveled the full length of the hall as she and General Equimy walked from the side entrance to the family section. It was not a long walk. It felt long. It felt like the kind of walk that takes longer than the clock measures, because every person in the room is experiencing it slightly differently, and none of them will forget it. Linda Akeba's camera operator had pivoted the moment the side door opened, and had not moved since. The press cameras along the left wall had all turned. The room's gaze followed Vanessa Hartley and General Equimy the way light follows a point of absolute gravity. Dignitaries who had been whispering to one another went still. The row of state legislators sat very straight. The two soldiers from Marcus Hartley's unit, third row, left side, watched with expressions that were beyond composure and below grief. The particular face of people who recognize something true arriving in a room where something false had just been corrected. At the security station near the hall's right side wall, Captain Joel Carver stood and watched. He was a still man in that moment. The kind of stillness that is not calm. The kind that is recalibration happening too fast for the body to integrate. His hand was at his side. His face was composed in the administrative way of a man who has spent a career composing his face for exactly this reason. But his eyes tracked Vanessa Hartley's progress down the marble floor, and behind those eyes something was being taken apart and reassembled in a configuration he had not prepared for. He had written the situation in his mind one way: a woman without credentials, without a lanyard, without an escort, a security anomaly, a clean, defensible removal based on protocol and reasonable assessment, and the absence of verifiable identification. He had narrated this to the press pool. He had used words he had used before in other incident reports. Words that had always been sufficient because protocol is a surface that reflects whatever stands behind it. What was standing behind it now was General Thomas Equimy, 4 stars, and Vanessa Hartley, Sergeant Major, United States Army, retired, mother of the man whose photograph was hanging at the front of this hall in an 8x10 frame with a gold border. Joel Carver was not stupid. He understood in real time, with a precision that felt almost physical, the nature of what had just happened to him. Adjutant Colonel Nora Steinberg moved through the room toward him quietly. She was a compact, precise woman in her Army service uniform. Dark jacket, gold insignia, the measured authority of someone accustomed to solving problems that other people have made. She reached Joel Carver and stopped beside him, close enough that what she said would not carry to the nearest attendees, but far enough that the distance between them was formal and absolute. She did not raise her voice. Raising her voice would have been theatrical, and Nora Steinberg was not a theatrical person. She was a methodical one. She looked at Joel Carver with the expression of someone who has already reached a conclusion and is now simply gathering data for the record. She said, "Can you explain to me what just happened?" It was not a question. The syntax was a question. The intent was documentation. She was not asking him to clarify something she didn't understand. She understood completely. She was asking him to hear himself say it out loud, in this room, with the footage that Linda Achibi's camera operator had been capturing now playing in the peripheral awareness of everyone who had been watching, so that whatever he said next would exist as a statement and not merely as a thought. Joel Carver began to say something about protocol. Steinberg listened. Her expression did not change. She let him use the words he had prepared, and she noted each one with the practiced attention of a woman who has spent a career understanding the difference between an explanation and an excuse. At the front of the hall, Vanessa Hartley reached the family section. She stopped at the white-sashed chair. She looked at it for one moment. At the ceremony program, on the seat, with Marcus Hartley's face on the cover. The same face on the program she still held in her own hand. She picked up the program from the chair. She held both copies for a moment, her son's photograph in each. Then she sat. She sat with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap, both programs held between her palms, and she looked at the large framed photograph at the front of the hall, the way a person looks at something they have looked at thousands of times in smaller versions. On a phone screen, on a mantle, in the particular dark of 3 in the morning, and are now seeing it full scale for the first time. General Ikweme took the seat beside her. He did not speak. He sat with the same straight-backed stillness and looked forward, and his presence beside her was not ceremony and not performance. It was simply company, the kind that costs something to give. Governor Caroline Voss, at the podium, looked at Vanessa Hartley. She looked for a long moment, long enough that the room felt it, long enough that whatever calculation was happening behind her composed and careful face completed itself without hurry. She had been a governor for 6 years. She had stood at many podiums through many difficult moments. She had learned that the most powerful thing a person in authority can do is be precisely honest about what is actually happening. She returned to the microphone. She adjusted it. She looked at her notes. She set her notes down. When she spoke, her voice was careful and precise, each word placed with the deliberateness of someone who understands that some sentences become permanent the moment they are said. "The family of Staff Sergeant Marcus Hartley," she said, "is now present." She paused. The room held its breath. "We will begin again." Linda Achibi had covered 11 years of military ceremonies. She had stood in marble halls and open-air amphitheaters and county fairgrounds converted into sacred spaces for an afternoon. She had recorded the folding of flags, the reading of citations, the controlled grief of families who had learned to hold themselves still in public. She knew the grammar of these moments. She knew when something was merely moving and when something was historic. And she had known from the precise second that Captain Joel Carver's hand came down on that table and his voice rose above the ambient sound of the room, that what she was watching was not a security incident. It was a mistake so large it would define careers. Not her career, his. She had not told her camera operator to keep rolling. Marcus Webb had simply not stopped. 11 years together builds that kind of instinct. From the moment Vanessa Hartley was walked toward the side exit, her burgundy blazer steady under the overhead fluorescent lights of the hall, her ceremony program still held at her side, Marcus Webb had framed every shot with the precision of someone who understood that what he was recording would matter. Linda Achibi stood slightly behind him, her press credentials hanging at her collar, her voice recorder running in her jacket pocket, and she did the math that journalists do, rapidly, in parallel, without interrupting her own observation. She calculated newsworthiness. She calculated consequence. She calculated the weight of what a camera sees versus what a man like Joel Carver assumed a camera could be managed into not seeing. The math came out the same every time she ran it. Now the hall had reassembled itself into ceremony. Governor Caroline Voss had returned to the podium. The attendees, dignitaries, and uniformed officers had reoriented toward the front of the room with the practiced discipline of people who understood that the event required their composure, even if the event had briefly lost its own. Vanessa Hartley sat in the family section, in the same chair that had been empty 20 minutes before. General Thomas Equime stood 3 feet to her right, still in full dress uniform, his posture communicating something to every person in the room who knew how to read a general's posture. Chaplain Douglas Whitfield had resumed his position at the side of the stage. Adjutant Colonel Nora Steinberg stood near the presentation table, where the medal case waited under the afternoon light falling from the skylights above. Linda Achebe watched all of it through Marcus Webb's camera frame, and she did not move. The citation for Staff Sergeant Marcus Hartley was read by a uniformed aide whose voice was trained for this and who read it without faltering. The words were formal and precise and devastating in the way that citations always are, because citations are documents that translate the last moments of a human life into language that can be entered into a permanent record, and no matter how well the language is chosen, there is always something in it that refuses to be fully contained. The aide read about the ambush. He read about the decision Marcus Hartley had made in the seconds available to him. He read about the 3 soldiers who came home because of what Staff Sergeant Marcus Hartley did and did not come home himself. Linda Achebe had heard citations before. She had recorded citations before. She noted with the part of her mind that never fully stopped working even in moments like this one, that Marcus Webb had shifted his frame slightly to include both the podium and Vanessa Hartley in the same shot, and that it was the right call. Then General Thomas Equime was asked to speak. He stepped to the podium with the unhurried authority of a man who had commanded thousands of soldiers and knew exactly how much space his presence occupied in a room. He adjusted the microphone once. He looked out at the assembled hall and he said Marcus Hartley's name, and his voice was even. He spoke about the unit. He spoke about the kind of soldier Marcus Hartley had been. Not the citation soldier, not the official record soldier, but the soldier who arrived early and stayed late and who could be heard laughing in the mess hall from 50 feet away, who had his mother's precision and his mother's instinct, and who had told General Equime once, during a late evening in a forward operating base, that neither of them would forget, that he had enlisted because he had watched Sergeant Major Hartley put on her uniform every morning of his childhood, and he could not imagine doing anything else with his life. General Thomas Equime paused. Not for effect. Something had caught in his voice, and he needed a second. The hall went quiet. Linda Achebe held her breath. Marcus Webb kept the camera steady. Then Equime cleared his throat and finished. Governor Caroline Voss lifted the medal case from the table, carried it across the stage, down the 2 steps, and over to Vanessa Hartley. She opened it. Neither woman spoke for a moment. Then the governor's voice carried clearly through the room. On behalf of a grateful nation and on behalf of the state, it is my honor to present the Medal of Honor posthumously to the family of Staff Sergeant Marcus Hartley for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. Vanessa Hartley took the medal in both hands. She held it carefully. Not for the cameras. She wasn't looking at the cameras, or the governor, or the room, just the medal. 2 years she'd been waiting for this, and most of those 2 years, she hadn't really believed it would come. 30 years in uniform had taught her how to stand still inside a hard moment. There was nothing left to do now except feel the weight of it. Linda Achebe checked the clock and wrote down the time. She'd use it in every version of the story she filed over the next 3 days. Across the hall, near the west wall, Something else was happening. Joel Carver had been asked for his radio 20 minutes ago. He still hadn't handed it over. He was busy explaining, patiently, because he believed he was the only person there who actually understood the situation, that he had followed protocol. He said protocol 4 times in a minute and a half. The woman had been in a restricted area without visible credentials. He was event security. He had identified a potential disruption and acted within his authority. He explained this to the officer who'd asked for the radio. Then Adjutant Colonel Nora Steinberg arrived, and he started over. Steinberg listened in full army dress under the fluorescence. She didn't interrupt. She waited until he got all the way to the part about his decision being reasonable and his assessment being professional. Then she waited a little longer. Then she said, "Captain Carver, that woman was the Gold Star mother. She is the reason everyone in this building is here today." Carver opened his mouth. Steinberg wasn't done. She received a formal invitation letter designating her as Family of the Honored. Her name was printed in the ceremony program. She was seated in the family section because she is the family. And you had her physically removed from this hall in front of governors, generals, press, and 400 attendees without asking her a single question. She paused. Not one question. Joel Carver said something about the lanyard system, about visible identification, about the responsibility of ceremony attendees to present credentials at the designated entry points. Adjutant Colonel Steinberg looked at him with an expression that was not anger. It was something more final than anger. It was the expression of institutional judgment already rendered, already documented, already on its way up a chain of command that would not be sympathetic to words like lanyard. She said, "Surrender your radio, Captain. You'll receive further instructions from your department's review board." She turned and walked back across the hall toward the ceremony, where the medal presentation had concluded, and Governor Voss was now embracing Vanessa Hartley with the careful formality of a hug that is also a public statement. Joel Carver stood at the security station holding his radio. The overhead fluorescent lights were indifferent above him. Marcus Webb had not stopped rolling. He had captured the security station exchange from 40 feet away with directional audio, and Linda Achebe had confirmed the audio quality in her earpiece at the moment Adjutant Colonel Steinberg said the words, "Gold Star Mother," because those 3 words at that volume in that context were the kind of audio that required no editing to be understood. She was already on her phone, one thumb moving while her eyes stayed on the room, communicating with her network producer, not asking, telling, that they had the full sequence, that it ran from the initial removal to the medal placement and included the confrontation at the security station, that it was ready to move. The producer asked how long to prepare a clip. Linda Achebe said 90 seconds would be enough. She told him to clear the evening broadcast's second segment. Then she put her phone back in her pocket and she watched the room. The ceremony was concluding. Chaplain Douglas Whitfield offered a closing prayer in the unhurried cadence of a man who had offered such prayers in difficult places and understood that they required time to do their work. The uniformed aide folded the final elements of the program. The attendees began the quiet collective exhale of people who have witnessed something significant and are not yet certain how to speak about it. Dignitaries turned to one another in murmured conversation. Cameras on tripods tracked the room with the mechanical patience of equipment that does not assign meaning to what it records, but captures it faithfully regardless. General Thomas Equimay had returned to Vanessa Hartley's side. They were not speaking. He simply stood near her, as if proximity itself was the statement he intended to make, and perhaps it was. Vanessa Hartley still held the medal. She had not placed it back in the case. She sat with it in both hands, her burgundy blazer precise across her shoulders. Her posture, the posture of someone who had learned 30 years ago how to sit in the middle of something enormous and remain entirely herself. She looked at the medal, not at the room where dignitaries were now approaching her, Not at the cameras whose operators were repositioning for closer angles. Not at the security station across the hall where Joel Carver was. At that precise moment, finally handing over his radio, she looked at the metal with the expression of someone who has been asked to carry something heavier than any weight she had carried before, and who has carried it anyway, because that is the only answer available to a mother when the alternative is to set it down. Linda Ashby watched her and did not speak. Marcus Webb did not lower the camera. The footage was already moving. The afternoon sun hit the flagstone plaza outside the Ashford Military Honor Hall at a low, generous angle, the kind of light that made everything look permanent and documented. Attendees filed through the tall glass doors in 2s and 3s, uniforms pressed, faces carrying the particular weight of ceremonies that had demanded something real from them. The air smelled like cut grass and the lingering warmth of a day that had already decided it would be remembered. Linda Ashby was standing 40 feet from the main entrance with her phone in her hand and her earpiece in her left ear, and she had not yet said a single word to anyone because she was watching a number climb. 93 seconds of footage. Her camera operator, a 26-year-old named Derek, who had been shooting field segments for 3 years and had never once asked to be in the story, had captured everything from a position near the press riser that gave him a clean, unobstructed angle on the entire main floor of the Honor Hall. The clip began with Joel Carver's open palm hitting the table beside the security station, the sound of it cutting through the ambient noise of the hall like something snapping. It ended with General Thomas Equimy walking Vanessa Hartley back through the side corridor door, his hand steady at her elbow, her ceremony program still folded and held against her side, the press cameras pivoting in unison the way cameras do when they collectively understand that the story has moved. 93 seconds. 400,000 views. Linda Ashby had been covering military ceremonies, state events, and municipal politics for 11 years, and she understood, with the particular precision of someone who had watched dozens of stories accelerate and dozens more dissolve before they reached anyone, that this one was not going to dissolve. The numbers had a texture to them that she recognized. They were not slowing down. They were not plateauing. They were doing the thing that only certain footage did, the thing that meant it had found a nerve that ran wider than one city and deeper than one news cycle. Her phone buzzed with a call from her managing editor. She let it go to voicemail. She already knew what he was going to say, and she needed 30 more seconds to finish the thought she was having about the shape of the story before she let anyone else's words into it. The thought was this: the footage did not need narration. It never had. You could watch those 93 seconds without a single word of context and understand, with the kind of understanding that bypasses argument and lands directly in the body, exactly what had happened. That was why it was spreading, not because someone had explained it, because no one needed to. She answered the next call. Inside the Honor Hall, in a service corridor that connected the main floor to the administrative wing, Joel Carver sat at a rectangular folding table under overhead fluorescent lights, with a legal pad and a pen, and the quiet, focused expression of a man who was certain he was solving his own problem. The folding table was the kind used for catering overflow, and someone had placed a bottle of water at his right elbow, and he had not touched it. He was writing. His handwriting was precise and practiced, the handwriting of someone who had filed many reports and believed in their structural integrity. He wrote, "Security protocol was followed in response to an unidentified individual who had entered a restricted section without visible credentials or authorized escort." He underlined the word authorized. He wrote, "Reasonable assessment of the situation indicated a potential security concern given the high-profile nature of the event and the presence of elected officials and military dignitaries." He paused. He added the word breach after the word security in the previous line, creating the phrase security breach, and he felt, in the adding of it, that he was clarifying rather than inflating. He was a precise man. He used precise language. That was not a flaw. That was a professional discipline that had served him across 19 years of service. He did not know about the footage. No one had come to tell him, because the two people who might have his communications liaison and his patrol supervisor were themselves watching the number climb on Linda Achebe's posted clip from their phones in the main parking lot, and neither of them had yet decided what to say or how to say it, or whether it was even their role to be the one who said it first. The communications director of the state police department, a woman named Patricia Holt, who had managed 11 years of department press and had an instinct for damage that was nearly physical, had been in her car in the lot of a grocery store 40 miles away when the alert hit her phone, and she had sat there for exactly 4 minutes reading the comments section before she called the department chief and said, without preamble, that they needed an emergency meeting on a Saturday before Sunday morning. The chief had agreed without asking why, because he had also seen it. Joel Carver wrote, "Recommend incident be closed pending standard review." He capped his pen. He read over what he had written. He was satisfied with it in the way that a man can be satisfied with a structure he has built, without understanding that the foundation under it has already been removed. In a room 2 doors down the same corridor, Lieutenant Sarah Munro was sitting in a chair with her phone face up on the table in front of her, and she was not composing anything. She had watched the clip twice. She was now on her 3rd viewing, not because she wanted to, but because she could not look away from herself in it. She was there on the left side of the frame, her short-sleeved uniform neat, her hand on Vanessa Hartley's arm, not rough, not aggressive, but present, insistent, the grip of someone following an order she had not questioned at the moment of receiving it. She watched herself in the footage, the way you watch a version of yourself that you are not sure you recognize. The version in the footage was compliant. The version in the footage had looked at a woman with 30 years of service and 2 officers at her elbows, and had made a calculation so fast it barely registered as a calculation. The captain gave the order. The order gets followed. The situation gets resolved. She watched Vanessa Hartley's face in the footage. The camera had caught it in the moment just before the side door opened, a 2-second window where the light from the hall's overhead panels fell across Vanessa Hartley's profile, and you could see her expression clearly. It was not fear. It was not anger. It was something quieter and older than either of those things, the expression of someone who had absorbed a blow and was deciding, in real time, how to carry it without letting it change the shape of what she was. Sarah Munro set her phone face down on the table. She sat in the fluorescent light of the corridor room and stared at the wall and did not pick up her pen. Outside the honor hall, in the afternoon sun that was still holding at that low, generous angle, General Thomas Egwimi stood at the top of the flagstone steps in his full dress uniform, and Linda Achebe was in front of him with her microphone, and Derek had the camera running, and the general had not asked for notes or preparation time because he did not need them. He stood the way he always stood, broad-shouldered, deliberate, completely still except for the movement of his chest when he breathed. And he looked directly into the camera lens, and he began to speak. Sergeant Major Vanessa Hartley served the United States Army for 30 years, he said. His voice was even and unhurried. It was the voice of a man who had delivered orders in conditions where the word he chose and the tone he used could determine what happened next, and he had never wasted either. She served in 3 combat deployments. She trained soldiers who went on to lead battalions. She gave this country decades of service that most people in this country will never fully understand because they were never asked to give anything close to it. He paused. Not for effect, because the next part required precision. Her son, Staff Sergeant Marcus Hartley, was killed in action in Afghanistan. He is the soldier this ceremony was held to honor. His mother, a decorated veteran of the United States Army, came to this building today to receive his Medal of Honor on his behalf. She arrived early, as soldiers do. She sat in the section designated for the family of the honored, as the family of the honored are invited to do. And she was physically removed from that building, in front of cameras, in front of dignitaries, in front of every uniform in that room, without a single person asking her her name. Linda Achebe did not interrupt. She understood the shape of what was happening, and she understood that her job right now was to hold the microphone steady and not speak. "What happened today inside that building," General Thomas Ekweye said, "was an embarrassment to every uniform in this nation. It was an embarrassment to the ceremony, to the institution, and to the memory of Staff Sergeant Marcus Hartley. I want to be precise about that. Not a mistake, not a misunderstanding that good people make under pressure. An embarrassment, because there was no pressure. There was no threat. There was a mother who came to honor her son, and a man who made a decision without asking a single question. And the consequences of that decision will be what they are going to be." He stopped. He did not add to it. He did not soften it. He looked into the camera for one more second, and then he looked at Linda Achebe and gave a small, deliberate nod that meant he was finished. And Linda Achebe said, "Thank you, General," and meant it in a way that went beyond the professional formality of the phrase. Derek kept rolling for 4 more seconds after the nod. The shot he held was the general, standing in the afternoon light at the top of the honor hall steps, in his full dress uniform. The flagstone and the glass panels and the pale sky behind him, looking like exactly what he was, a man who had said the accurate thing and was prepared to stand behind it. The clip of the statement went up 40 minutes later. It did not reach 400,000 views. It exceeded them before midnight. By then, in the service corridor, under the fluorescent lights, Joel Carver had finished his incident report and was waiting for someone to come retrieve it. He had folded it into thirds along the crease lines of the legal pad paper. He had written his badge number in the upper right corner. He had done everything correctly. He was a precise man. He used precise language. He had followed protocol, and protocol was not a feeling. It was a structure, and structures held. He did not know yet that every structure requires a foundation. He did not know yet that the foundation under his had been removed 93 seconds at a time, 400,000 views at a time, one general's measured and devastating sentence at a time, and was now fully, permanently, and publicly gone. He sat in the fluorescent light and waited. 40 miles away, in the parking lot of a grocery store, Patricia Holt was still on the phone with the department chief, and the word she kept using was irreversible. She used it 3 times. She was not wrong. The State Police Department's Internal Affairs conference room was not designed for drama. It was designed for fluorescent lighting, laminate table surfaces, and the kind of institutional beige that communicated, wordlessly, that everything conducted within these walls would be treated as process rather than spectacle. Monday morning sunlight pressed through the high-set windows along the north wall, striping the table in pale, even bands. A water pitcher sat in the center of the table, untouched. A court reporter's equipment was already running. The room was prepared before 7 in the morning, because the people who called this inquiry understood something that Joel Carver had not yet understood. This was not a procedural formality. This was a dismantling. Commissioner Harold Prout had not slept well. He had spent most of Sunday watching the view count on Linda Achebe's 93-second clip climb past 2 million and then past 3, and he had spent the remaining hours of that evening on calls with the mayor's office, with the Department of Defense liaison, and with his own department's legal counsel. He had been a commissioner for 11 years. He had managed controversies before. He had never managed anything that moved at this velocity, with this kind of clarity, with this kind of footage. There was no ambiguity in the clip. There was no camera angle that softened what had happened. There was a black woman in a burgundy blazer being walked out of a military ceremony by 2 uniformed officers on the order of a captain who had not asked her a single question. That was what the footage showed. And that was what Commissioner Harold Prout had to respond to. And he had responded by convening the earliest formal review board he had ever assembled in 11 years of holding this office. Joel Carver arrived at 7:45 in his long-sleeved dress uniform, polished and pressed. He arrived with his attorney, a compact man named Gerald Fayas, who carried a leather folder and wore the particular expression of someone who already knows more than his client about how badly things are going. Joel Carver himself did not look like a man who had spent the weekend reconsidering anything. He looked like a man who had spent the weekend organizing his defense, which was a different enterprise entirely. His posture was straight. His expression was controlled. He had done nothing wrong. He had enforced security protocol at a high-profile public event. He had identified an individual without visible credentials in a restricted section. He had acted decisively. These were the sentences he had rehearsed, and they fit together cleanly, and he believed in them the way a person believes in a structure they have built themselves before anyone applies weight to it. The board convened at 8 o'clock. Commissioner Pruitt was present. Adjutant Colonel Nora Steinberg was present in her Army dress uniform, seated to the commissioner's left, her expression carrying the particular quality of someone who has decided precisely how much they intend to say and in what order. She had submitted her formal complaint to the Department of Defense and to this office simultaneously on Saturday afternoon, 14 hours after the ceremony concluded. The complaint was 11 pages. It cited specific violations, specific moments, and contained attached documentation that included the original invitation letter mailed to Vanessa Hartley, the ceremony program bearing Vanessa Hartley's name under the heading Family of the Honored, and a timeline reconstructed from event staff testimony and security footage from the Honor Hall's own interior cameras. The board reviewed the footage first. Linda Akabe's clip was played in full, and then the Honor Hall's interior camera footage was played in full, and the two pieces of footage together created a complete and uninterrupted record of events from the moment Joel Carver left the security station to the moment General Thomas Equamy walked Vanessa Hartley back through the side corridor door. Nobody in the room said anything while the footage played. The court reporter's keys were still. Even Gerald Fass was quiet, watching the screen with the leather folder closed in front of him. When the footage concluded, the board's lead examiner, a deputy commissioner named Arlene Hadfield, who had been conducting internal reviews for 16 years, set a printed document on the table in front of her and asked her first question. She asked it evenly, without inflection, without any prosecutorial performance, because she did not need to perform. The question was the instrument. "Captain Carver," she said, "at what point during your interaction with the individual in the reserved section did you ask her name?" Joel Carver's answer, the first time he gave it, was structured around protocol. He explained that in a security context, the burden of identification lies with the individual seeking access to a restricted area, not with the officer responsible for maintaining that area's integrity. He explained that visible credentials were the established verification mechanism for the event. He explained that his responsibility was to the safety and dignity of the ceremony, and that an unescorted individual without visible credentials in a reserved section represented a reasonable cause for intervention. Arlene Hadfield listened to all of it. Then she asked the question again. "At what point did you ask her name?" The second answer was shorter. It contained the same structural components as the first, but in compressed form, and it arrived at the same place. He had not asked her name because the situation had not warranted the kind of one-on-one dialogue that might have created additional disruption. Arlene Hadfield made a note. "And at what point did you ask her why she was seated in the family section?" Joel Carver's attorney placed one hand briefly on his client's forearm. Joel Carver's explained that the family section's restricted status was clearly demarcated with physical roping and signage, and that an individual's presence within that demarcated area without visible credentials was itself sufficient cause. "Captain Carver," Arlene Hadfield said, I am going to ask you to answer the question I asked. At what point did you ask her why she was in the family section? Gerald Fass leaned slightly toward his client. Joel Carver said he had not asked that specific question. Adjutant Colonel Nora Steinberg did not move. She had been still for the entire exchange, and she remained still, and the stillness itself was a form of pressure. The invitation letter was introduced next. It was projected on the wall screen and read aloud, including the line that stated in plain, unambiguous language that the recipient was invited as family of the honored service member and was to be directed to the reserved family section upon arrival. Joel Carver was asked if he had seen this letter before today. He said he had not been provided with the family documentation packet. He was asked whose responsibility the family documentation packet fell under during his security briefing preparation. The answer, drawn out across 3 exchanges that became increasingly granular, was that it fell under his. The ceremony program was introduced. Vanessa Hartley's name was on page 3, listed directly beneath Marcus Hartley's name, under the heading that read Gold Star Family in Attendance. Joel Carver was asked if he had reviewed the ceremony program before the event. He said he had reviewed the security layout and the VIP list. He was asked if those 2 documents were the same thing. They were not. Chaplain Douglas Whitfield had submitted written testimony, which was read into the record. He stated that he had noticed the family chair empty approximately 12 minutes into the ceremony, and that upon noticing it, he had experienced immediate concern because the family chair being empty at a Medal of Honor ceremony was not a logistical oversight, it was a catastrophe. He stated that he had flagged Adjutant Colonel Nora Steinberg's aide within 3 minutes of noticing the empty chair, and that by that point, the woman who belonged in that chair had already been walked out of the building. 2 event staff members had provided testimony as well. Both stated that they had seen Vanessa Hartley arrive and move toward the family section, and that they had assumed she was exactly who she appeared to be, the mother of the honored soldier, arriving early, finding her seat. Adjutant Colonel Nora Steinberg spoke last and at length. She spoke without notes. She described what it meant, institutionally and morally, for a Gold Star mother to be physically removed from her own child's Medal of Honor ceremony. She described Staff Sergeant Marcus Hartley's service record. She described Vanessa Hartley's 30-year service record. She described what those 30 years represented in tangible terms: 3 combat deployments, 2 commendations, a career that had produced officers now serving in command roles across the Army. She said that the family of a fallen soldier does not need to prove to any security captain that they have earned the right to sit in the chair that was placed in that room specifically for them. She said it once clearly and did not repeat it because it did not need repeating. By 11:15 in the morning, Gerald Fass was no longer engaging with the board's questions on procedural grounds. He was leaning close to his client and speaking quietly, and Joel Carver's composure, which had held with remarkable consistency through the first 2 hours of the session, had developed the particular quality of something that is holding not because it is strong, but because it has not yet received the specific pressure that will end it. That pressure arrived when Commissioner Pruitt himself spoke. He had been largely silent through the proceedings, deferring to Arlene Hadfield's methodical process. When he spoke directly and briefly. He said that the department's responsibility was not only to assess whether Captain Carver had violated written protocol, but to assess whether his judgment, in the absence of written protocol, in the space between rules where officers make decisions about human beings every single day, had represented the standard this department expected of its personnel. He said that in his assessment, based on the evidence presented, the answer to that question was clear. He said the board would complete its formal deliberations and issue findings within 48 hours. Gerald Fass asked his client to say nothing further. Vanessa Hartley was at the kitchen table when the morning sun came through the east-facing window and laid a long, warm rectangle across the wood surface. She had been sitting there since 6:30 with a cup of coffee and a stack of envelopes that had grown steadily over the weekend and now stood approximately 4 inches high. She had not expected letters. She had not expected anything except the medal on the mantel in the next room, which she had placed there Saturday evening after coming home and sitting quietly for a long time before she could bring herself to put it somewhere rather than holding it. The letters had started arriving Saturday. Some came through the news network's website, forwarded by Linda Achebe's producers. Some came through veterans organizations who had tracked down a contact address. Some were handwritten, mailed the old way, and those had begun arriving in the morning postal delivery because they had been written and sent within hours of the footage spreading Friday evening by people who had gone to the post office on a Saturday morning specifically to mail them. She read each one. A retired master sergeant from Georgia who said he had recognized the expression on her face from inside his own chest. A Gold Star mother from Oregon who said she had watched the footage 7 times and cried 6 of them, and on the 7th, she had recognized something that was not grief. A young woman, 23 years old, who had just completed basic training, who said she wanted to serve the kind of country that produced people like Vanessa Hartley and was going to spend her entire career trying to earn that. Vanessa Hartley read this letter twice and set it at the top of the stack. She was not watching the news. She did not need to know what was happening in a conference room in the state police building downtown, because what was happening in that room was already beyond her. It was institutional machinery processing something that had already passed through her and left her standing. What Joel Carver had tried to take from her in that hall had not, in fact, been taken. It had not been accessible to him, and this was not something she was proud of or performing. It was simply a fact, the same way 30 years of service was a fact, the same way Marcus was a fact, the same way the medal on the mantel was a fact. She picked up the next letter. The return address was from a town in Kansas she had never visited. The handwriting on the envelope was careful and slanted, the handwriting of someone older, someone who had written many letters over many years. She opened it and began to read, and outside the window the morning light was steady and full, and inside the house everything was quiet except for the small sound of paper moving in her hands. The press release was 27 words of careful nothing. Joel Carver's departure from the state police department was announced on a Tuesday morning, tucked inside a PDF posted to the department's public affairs page, between a traffic advisory and a notice about parking enforcement changes. The language was surgical in its blandness. Mutual agreement, career transition. We thank Captain Carver for his years of service. No names of who had pressured the resignation, no acknowledgement of what had triggered the review, no mention of a woman in a burgundy blazer being walked out of a ceremony honoring her dead son while 400,000 people watched on their phones. Nobody was deceived by the language. Not the veterans organizations who had flooded the commissioner's inbox for 3 weeks. Not the reporters who had been monitoring the review board proceedings. Not Adjutant Colonel Nora Steinberg, who read the release at her desk, set her phone face down, and returned to her work without expression. And not Joel Carver himself, who had sat in his attorney's office the previous Friday and heard, in careful legal language of a different kind, exactly what the department needed from him and exactly what his continued resistance would cost. The 2-paragraph press release was not a graceful exit. It was a door being closed from the outside. He had never asked her name. That was the sentence that had ended him. Not the footage, though the footage had stripped away every procedural argument he had tried to construct. Not the eyewitness testimony, though Chaplain Douglas Whitfield's quiet, precise account had dismantled his timeline. It was the repeated question in that review boardroom. Asked once, asked again, asked a final time, with the kind of stillness that made silence its own answer. At what point did you ask this woman her name? He had not. 3 weeks, 1 resignation, and 27 words of bureaucratic language later. That fact was the only sentence in the room that had mattered. Vanessa Hartley was at her kitchen table when the morning light came through the window. She had not sought out the press release. A neighbor had forwarded it to her with a single line of text, and she had read it once, set her phone beside her coffee cup, and looked out at the yard where the maple tree her husband had planted the year Marcus was born was dropping its leaves in the October air. She did not feel triumphant. She had not expected to. There are things that look like victory from the outside, that feel, from the inside, like standing in a room after a fire has gone through it. The structure is still there, but the air is changed. The letter from General Thomas Equame had arrived 4 days earlier, handwritten on plain stationery in the measured cursive of a man who had spent 50 years writing things that needed to last. He had not written about Joel Carver. He had written about Marcus. He had written about the first time he had seen Marcus Hartley's unit in the field, about a specific morning in a forward operating base when Marcus had done something that made Equame think of Vanessa, about the particular quality of calm Marcus carried, that the general now understood was inherited and earned rather than simply given. The letter was 3 pages. Vanessa Hartley had read it twice at the kitchen table and once more sitting on the edge of Marcus's bed in the room she had kept exactly as it was, and she had not been able to finish it the 3rd time. She had folded it carefully and placed it inside the cedar box on her dresser, where she kept the things that mattered most. Lieutenant Sarah Monroe's letter had come the same week. It was typed, formal in structure, addressed to Sergeant Major Vanessa Hartley, with the full title intact. Sarah Monroe had written that she had recognized something was wrong before she had been willing to act on it, and that the distance between recognizing and acting was something she intended to spend the rest of her career closing. She did not ask for forgiveness. She did not offer explanations as though they were excuses. She simply said what she had done, what she understood about it now, and what she meant to do differently. Vanessa Hartley read it once, set it on the table, and did not reach for it again. She held no anger for Sarah Monroe. She also held no obligation to absolve her. Some things a person has to carry to their own resolution, and that was honest work that belonged entirely to the young officer who had written the letter. The Ashford Military Honor Hall was quiet on a Thursday morning 3 weeks after the ceremony. No press, no dignitaries, no rows of pressed uniforms or cameras on tripods. The skylights sent clean white light across the marble floor in long panels, and the building held the particular silence of a place that takes its purpose seriously even when no one is watching. Vanessa Hartley walked in through the front entrance, wearing the same burgundy blazer over her white shirt, the same dark slacks, the same low-heeled shoes that had made that sound on the marble floor when every camera in the room had pivoted to follow her 3 weeks before. A facility staff member named Roy, a quiet man in his 60s who maintained the memorial wall with the care of someone who understood what the names on it represented, led her to the section where Marcus Hartley's name had been officially engraved that morning. She stood in front of it for a long time without speaking. Roy stood a respectful distance away, and after a while he asked, gently, if she would like a photograph. She said yes. She stood squarely in front of her son's name, her hands at her sides, her chin level, her eyes looking directly into the camera, with the same expression she had worn when Joel Carver's hand had hit that table and the world had gone silent around her. Not grief, not defiance, dignity, the kind that had never required his permission to exist and had never been in any danger from a man who never thought to ask her name. You just heard a story that history tried to overlook. If it stayed with you, take a second to stand with it. Subscribe, share, and help us keep telling the stories that deserve light, not silence.